I'm Karen Tan, and I'm a lecturer with the University of Southampton. I lead 3 modules which collectively support more than 500 students in our School of Humanities, and my main role is primarily helping postgraduate students with their research.
And I'm Peter Brugger, a lecturer with the University of Southampton in their collaboration with Dalian Polytechnic University. In the past 3 years, a lot of changes have occurred in our teaching, and these changes have come with a variety of challenges. Switching to online modalities, we have got us scrambling, so to speak, as we adapt and tried to transition and continue our teaching as smoothly as possible. Some of us have experienced different levels of success and have learned from mistakes in our pedagogies during that period.
For better or worse, to borrow that cliche, this change has offered us useful, if not invaluable, information for our teaching. For this paper, we ask one main question: that in light of this context in which we have taught and adapted to online teaching in the past 2 to 3 years, how can we improve and become better as facilitators? Or put simply, what have we learned?
This broad question can be further divided into 3 parts, which are closely entwined. 1, which deals with student engagement and involvement. 2, our teaching focus. And 3, our content, which is mediated and in this case influenced by our means of lesson delivery. In order to answer this question, first we will look at our assumptions on these 3 areas, starting with learner motivation and engagement. The underlying premise for many of us is that after allaying student worries and concerns, students will adjust and will be able to make use of university resources online and will be able to carry on as per normal. To a certain extent, this was true. Very rapidly, we soon discovered that this emphasized differences or magnified types of learner response and motivation, which can be categorized into 3 main groups: those who kept a very low profile beyond attending online sessions. The second group of students are those who would send quite frequent emails to query and ask clarification on certain aspects of the lesson, and often they are same small group of students. And finally, or those who would occasionally make an appearance to log their attendance for a while, then disappear only to get in contact when assignment deadlines loom near. You would have encountered these students before.
However, when we look closely at these types of student behavior, they are actually typical of any big cohort, where attendance has been observed to be linked to types of penalties being enforced for absenteeism. So what has changed, and how is this any different if that is the typical student cohort? And is this concerning? Beyond attendance records and student absences, and through recordings posted online and downloads, one thing which has emerged is that student attendance has been sporadic, if not dismal. For example, tutors who actively encourage interaction by posing questions and calling out a few to answer online were losing their audience, while those who duplicated their teaching from in-person lecture to online lecture maintained a consistent number of students through the weeks, albeit a low number. And something else, attendance was observed to have gone up, whilst online sessions were occurring in real time when certain lectures were perceived as of immediate importance, suggesting that students who were connected to one another in their own online chats were informing one another, and thus encouraging classmates to attend. We will return to this.
Another behavior or action which has been noted, though this has not yet been fully investigated, is that students were tailoring their use of recordings or recorded lectures and seminars at their own time, pace, and purpose. For example, they were fast forwarding the recording skipping what presumably was perceived as irrelevant bits, and moving straight to the core content, or what is being perceived by them to be the crucial part. So returning to the theme of student motivation, this new context suggests that our old assumptions, the broad brush of what we deem motivation, has to change, or the very least, that student motivation and engagement have taken a new form. This is just one example of the change in student engagement, or what we call delayed or deferred engagement.
One point to note, for colleagues more used to seeing bodies in lecture halls, more colloquially, bums on seats, this change is one negative outcome to in-person teaching, and that's why we have mentioned why online teaching has sometimes been seen as a precursor to in-person teaching, particularly when resources and teaching are not geared to be carried out as predominantly online. Many studies have looked at online courses, MOOCs, in which attendance has a high attrition rate or that the number of students dropped considerably after the first few weeks. However, we do not have this luxury with our own students. How then do we take into account this type of engagement, and to a certain extent, how can we encourage student motivation, which has a direct relationship with positive learner outcomes?
We have three simple suggestions to encourage active listening via signposts so as to cater to non-linear viewing habits. There should be a clear chronological framework with clear demarcated sections, or possibly repetition with reminders about key information. This might also mean having a brief but comprehensive review of key points at the end. While this might no longer be interesting, this serves as crucial reminders to students of what has been covered. This is a good time to look at limitations, seen from a tutor perspective, but useful to consider. The use of signposts, often useful priming for students, and which can be used to structure, such as in 3 parts, the lectures for students. This raises another useful point. At which stage is it spoon-feeding students and diminishing opportunities to discover information for themselves, or giving them the information and allowing time for them to digest the information within the online session? There are different implications for these. For the first, in which information is presented, students will come to expect them and might lead to dependence, something not to be encouraged. The second implication, following the giving students opportunity to digest and time, would further encourage recordings to be skipped and jumped when viewing them. This poses a dilemma. We return to the second sub-question, 2. Our teaching focus, which we will deal together with the third part, which is our content, which is often influenced by our means of lesson delivery. Earlier, we mentioned about student engagement, which might be delayed or deferred, which may not take place with the lesson online itself. The student behavior or action is actually not new and is in line with how some people view online films or recordings, in which streaming can be consumed non-chronologically, with some segments being repeated.
Why does this take place? The simple answer, because technology allows it, and possibly, but mainly because this is perceived as saving time. But we speculate this offers a level of control to users, which can be comforting, if not reassuring, during a time when so many things seem out of control. If we accept this as a likely possibility that this happens, how are we to deal with this without abjuring or negating our responsibility as lecturers to involve and engage our students in their learning progress?
We will make 3 assumptions here. One, that after a couple of years, tutors are relatively comfortable and can navigate and incorporate different online teaching software and applications within their teaching. For example, within the use of Microsoft Teams, tutors are comfortable using their related applications such as forms, etc. 2. Tutors are able and willing to make some adjustments in order to utilize a variety of methods that can encourage higher student engagement. 3. That these adjustments, if they can take a certain amount of time and effort, can be replicable, or that skills learnt can be used repeatedly or frequently. Returning to the two other parts, let's look at assumptions on our teaching, focus and content. This seems obvious, but needs reiterating that teaching needs to be stripped down to bare bones in order to sustain interest and attention. With online teaching, it's harder to monitor student engagement and interest. Thus, any assumption that our teaching can be replicated or duplicated from previous lessons in person ought to be re-evaluated and to take into account this new context.
This leads to the next step of this bare bones type of lesson, light touch and gentleness. For smaller classes, this can be done by mentioning their names. In bigger groups, this can be through rhetorical questions designed to provoke thinking, but not to put a student on the spot in a big group. The implication for this then is about reordering and looking closely at our focus. We need to ask what is fundamental to helping students gain that particular knowledge. In other words, looking at what is essential and what is good to know. There is no longer room for tangents, extraneous material, and longer in-depth discussions. This, of course, has its own negative implications. Now, turning to content and method of online delivery, as mentioned, content has to be pared down, punchy, and with clear signposting, which can cater to non-chronological consumption of the recording, while keeping attention and attendance stable. This suggests careful selection and balance in how much and to what extent content and application are included in any online teaching. For example, too much content can be overwhelming, which means that key or core information will be lost or will be ignored in the deluge of information. This is not new in pedagogy. However, online teaching means that this runs the greater risk of fatigue for students. This also begs the question, what about lecturers in which fatigue dimension is on the rise, with burnout a possibility?
However, it is now pertinent to consider some issues. That student engagement is still dependent on many factors, and for content, what seems crucial and obvious to lecturers might not appear so to students. For the tutor or lecturer, there is urgency for adaptability and flexibility for learner acquisition of knowledge, but also an equally important need to have work-life balance while managing institutional workload. But once given all this, there are many positive signs. Strategic implementation by the tutor, who shows restraint in delivery in their pedagogies, can serve to increase the depth of reach for their students. Unless caution and balance are observed, then the reaction from positive acceptance can become avoidance for both learners and educators.
Online teaching changes incrementally due to constant updates by external providers, and thus the skill for teacher adaptability and exploitation of crucial content both suggest a balancing act between adherence to one's plan and flexibility to abandon one's plan if functionality is compromised.
Therefore, in our paper, we have proposed re-looking at the different assumptions on learners, content and tutor flexibility, and suggests that for many who have constantly been improving their pedagogy, have indeed found a new form of equilibrium in our understanding of the new normal. Thank you very much. These are the QR barcodes. If you can scan either one, this takes you straight to our respective emails.